Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. So, as previously mentioned, I have joined the Scooby-Doo Readathon that is being hosted by Simone at Me, Simone, and I, and that is being co-hosted by Clint and Emily at Clint from Reads Readers and Emily from Novel Novels, and I will link all of their channels down below so you can go check them out and follow them as well. So for the first book that I had done, which was my previous video, I had done the Scooby-Doo, which was first prompt, and that was to read a book starting with the letter R or an author with the R initial. So that one is done and the review is now up. For the next one, I opted to do the fourth prompt because I just don't feel like going in order at the moment. And that is Fred, which is read a book with white and blue on the cover, and I opted to read Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman. And so I will keep this nice and simple and as spoiler free as I possibly can. I will do more of a deep dive review in another video. So this is the first time that I've ever read this book. I have seen the movie a bunch of times. Practical Magic is one of my go-to favorite movies. And I have to admit, I didn't know what to expect going into reading the book just because more often than not, the movie and the book are never in alignment. There's no parallels, or there's very few parallels drawn between the two. And so, after watching a review on this video, or rather on this book by the Bold Book Geek, and I can link his review down below as well. But after listening to him, I was very curious and surprised to know that there was a book, so I went to go hunt it down. And I just finished listening to it or reading it last night, as I've been doing it through audiobook, and I'm quite surprised at the difference between the movie and the book. I don't know how else to do this other than to compare the two. You know, the book is so much more in depth, and it goes over the course span of years and not just, blink overnight type thing. The movie, which I won't will well, the movie will still be one of my top favorites, and I love the movie by itself. In comparison, there's no comparison. As far as I'm concerned, the movie is loosely based on the book, nothing more. They took main elements or pieces of what was in the book and threw it together and made a movie out of it. And don't get me wrong, I think they did a fairly good job of it. They definitely changed some details into it and reworked some of the more smaller details. For example, without trying to give too much away, they made small exchanges. So instead of a rose bush, it was lilacs, and instead of the girls being as young as they are, they're a little bit older. There was minimal changes that was done based on what they had done with the movie, but based on the book itself. So for those of you who have never read it or have never heard of it, this is about a story of witches and a very interesting family. Two little girls end up being orphaned, and they end up having to go and live with their aunts, and they end up learning about witchcraft and all those kinds of things. And I really have to admit, I really enjoyed the book. I wasn't sure at first. I was a little skeptical going in just because, as I said, I really enjoyed the movie and I had no idea what I was walking into. But there was so much more in depth, or so much more description as to what was going on in the book compared to the movie. There was more to the story of each of the girls, Jillian and Sally, which is the two main little girls that we follow the story with. And it's them that we follow through the course of the book and the movie, really. But the difference in terms of their lifespan and the events that they both went through and the number of years that span between events is huge in the book compared to the movie. In the movie, it makes it seem like, okay, the girls were orphaned, they land on their aunt's doorstep, they grow up, they witness a whole bunch of stuff, the kids split, they go their separate ways, and then years later, the youngest shows up on the doorstep in trouble. Typical story, right? Well, in the book, it goes into way more detail, way more interesting facts and interesting events that follow it. And I almost want to say I'm a little disappointed, actually. I know that there's a prequel to this book, and I will definitely look into that because I don't know how much of that ended up in the movie. But based on the movie itself, one of my favorite things when it comes to movies or books or stories of any kind like this is the history behind it, the why, and the lead up to it. So in the movie, they explain why certain things happen. So, for example, the story behind the time beetle, or the tick-tock beetle. I can't remember exactly what they're called, but they're basically it's seen as a death beetle, and if it shows up and starts ticking, basically death is on your doorstep, and you're ticking down the time clock. And they explain all that in the movie. They go into depth and they explain the history and their ancestry and into the whys and how everything works within the family and the history and the women revolving around this family. Whereas in the book, they touched on it like once, and they briefly mentioned the history, and I mean briefly, like it was a based on the audiobook that I listened to. It was like, I don't know, a 10-minute blurb, not even. So I was really disappointed in that just because, as I said, listening to the history of a story, especially when it comes to witches, I find the history behind it is always fascinating because it's always different. There might be some similarities, a lot of them stemming from historical events around Salem and the witch trials, but there's always a different story to it. Each family has a different history as to why and the gifts that they're given. So I have to say, in terms of that, I was a little disappointed in the book just because they didn't go into that. So I'm kind of hoping that if I go into the prequel, which I will once this readathon is done, that maybe they'll dive into that more. I'm hoping, because for me that was a big letdown. But overall, I did enjoy what the book did cover and what they did go over. The different angles of love and relationships and family. And again, I enjoy the bonds in this story. That's something that drives me to a story more than anything else, is the bonds of friendship and family that get created and the complexity that goes with them. There is no such thing as an easy friendship. It doesn't matter whether they're best friends, they're siblings, they're husband and wife. It doesn't matter what the relationship is. It's never easy. And if it is, I don't know if it's, I don't know. I'm going to hold judgment on that. But I don't know of a single relationship that's worthwhile that would be considered easy. So that's just my thoughts and opinions. But, um, but like I said, sort of a brief rundown, I guess, trying not to give too much away. So it starts out in the beginning of the book, or in the movie, really. It starts out in the beginning where, as I said, the kids become orphaned, their parents die, they end up with their aunts, and they learn that their aunts are witches and the stories that go around with that, and the pros and the cons and the consequences. And as the girls grow up, they make decisions for themselves based on what they're seeing, as a lot of women in the town that they're living in approach the witches for magical help, and it's always revolving around love spells and things like that, which is kind of lame in my opinion. And so the girls end up developing a bias that, love is bad because all it does is turn them into zombies, and it all they see is the negative part of it because they're coming to witchcraft for a solution. And I don't care what you say or what you think or whatever. Any witchcraft story, any story you've ever read, magic cannot create love. It can create lust and very strong attachment feelings, but it can never truly create the real thing. Love is unexplainable and it's not something that you can conjure. And I'm quoting that from Charmed for anybody who missed that. Original, not this new thing. Anyway, so, they go through that, they create their bias, and they grow up in the idea that love isn't exactly worth it. So, as the kids get older, things change and they do fall in love again. And then, events spiral out from there. The youngest, who ends up taking off, ends up getting herself into some serious trouble and comes back looking for help. And that trouble ends up eventually being followed up by a police investigator and causes a whole bunch of trouble there too. So, again, I'm not trying to go into too much just because I don't want to spoil it. I will definitely do a more in-depth video, more in-depth review between the two, digging a little bit more into the story. Because again, this is one of my favorites, and I really don't want to spoil it. So, okay, so that was sort of my rundown, very brief rundown on the book Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman. Again, this is the next prompt that I chose, which was prompt 4 of the Scooby-Doo Readathon. The next one that I'm going to go into will be prompt 5, which is Daphne, which is read a cover by book. So basically that means that I chose a book that I bought or was basically interested in nothing else but the cover. It was the cover that drew me in. I didn't read the synopsis. I know absolutely nothing about this book other than when I picked it up in the store, it did quickly basically mention something about the Snow White. So beyond that, I have absolutely no idea what I'm walking into. I just know that the cover I found was absolutely beautiful, and that's what drew me in. So I'm going to be going by The Evil Queen, I believe it's called. Yeah, it's called The Evil Queen by Gina Schulter. And that will be my next book that I will go into, and then I will do a rundown based on that in my next video. So thank you again so much for listening. If you are new to my channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. And if you are an existing subscriber, I thank you so much for supporting my channel, and I will talk to you in the next video. Thank you so much.